And then I will hand it over to Srdjan for the final part of the program.
So, I guess you met most of the people who are on the panel, but the only person who needs an introduction is Florian Schütz, who is a founding director of the Swiss National Federal Office for Cybersecurity. Florian has a long career in the security industry and is an alumni of ETH Zurich, of course, only the best people. And but you will most probably learn most about him if you Google Mr. Cyber Schweiz, and his name and his face will pop up as a result. So with that, I think we know all of our panelists. I created a set of questions, and we will go over several topics from AI to quantum key distribution. So a number of topics on which I would like to see our panelists give their views, some of them a little bit controversial. So I will start with the first one, which is related to AI, as a number of talks today. There has been a debate between Benio and LeCun on the AI and whether AI poses an existential threat to humanity. Even now, 9 hours ago, Jan LeCun tweeted something along the lines that you must be naive or self-delusioned if you believe that AI is going to reach superhuman capabilities, and so it's an ongoing debate. So I would like to ask our panelists to essentially tell us where do they stand on this in this polarized on this polarized topic. Adi?
So it's a danger, but it's not very high on my list of dangers. I must confess that I'm less worried about this super machine learning destroying humanity. I'm much more worried about human stupidity destroying humanity. There's a much higher chance. I'll really try to work in that direction rather than spend a lot of effort on trying to prevent the unlikely situation in which ChatGPT 17 is going to decide to destroy us.
Any other views, Florian?
Yeah, I go in the similar direction, and I do think, as with every new technology, it's quickly, people are quick to say, okay, we should ban it, we should not do anything with it. This was true for books back in the days when the book was invented. And I think today we can agree that books should not be banned, which would be a bad thing. And at the same time, I do think we also need to accept that it actually changes society. It changes how we behave, it changes what we do. And the question is always, how good do we adapt to this kind of change? And I do think that's where we need to really be very open and transparent about what we find in order to find solutions how to deal with new technology. But that requires us to do research.
So given all that we know, should AI be regulated or not?
So I have to tell you a secret. Regulation doesn't solve problems. Regulation helps in punishing violators, and along the way also punishing lots of innocent bystanders. I can give you many, many examples of this. Think about, banking system, very, very highly regulated. Does it stop Russian oligarchs from smuggling their money out? No. It makes it a little bit more expensive and more difficult. Does it prevent people, honest people from opening bank accounts abroad for totally legitimate reasons? The answer is yes. Look at regulations about car emissions. Did it stop Daimler-Benz from cheating in this? No. But regulations are something that you do to cover your ass, not in order to really solve the problem. So I'm in favor of some level of regulation, but thinking that if we regulate AI, we will eliminate all risks associated with it. And now everyone is going to behave properly. is an illusion.
So I will say, yeah, I agree, but we can't ignore it. So Intel has a big responsible AI initiative, and we really need to work with the industry partners to solve this challenge. I'm sure others are looking at this as well. So that's all I have to say.
But be careful not to have those innocent bystanders being punished. There's a lot of good which is going to follow from research in AI. And if you overregulate, Chinese companies, which will be under no constraints and will be able to use all data in China as training examples, are going to
yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I agree. In fact, I wasn't even saying that we need regulations. I was just saying the problem can't be ignored, and it's really need to come from sort of building these responsible solutions. That's all.
Florian?
Yes.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Allow me to disagree slightly.
Oh, okay.
Hey, this is an ideal panel now.
And
Please go ahead.
Not a fan of regulation, just to put that out there. But regulation has two means. It can even out markets, so it can make competition more fair. Talking about good regulation. And regulation can also set boundaries of what is socially and legally acceptable. And I do think in democratic countries, we sort of rely on a contract with society where we say, that's the rule that we want to play by. Is everyone adhering to them? No, of course not. That's why we have police forces. That's why we have other things, right? Is everyone in the world agreeing on the same set of values? No. But if you actually can generate a set of values that is widely acceptable, you can still have a positive influence. And I do think I would not directly just regulate for the regulation's sake, and I would certainly not regulate research. I would rather look at where do we actually need regulation in the application of AI to prevent bad things from happening. And I do think then the set becomes really small, but we should constantly monitor.
But then you should also consider the possibility of having a kind of voluntary guidelines other than strict regulations, which will say this area is dangerous, watch your step. Just regulating something, saying thou shall not do research in AI is going to be counterproductive.
Absolutely. We shouldn't prevent research in AI at all, not even as a last means. And also regulation is a means, right? You should try things before. As you said, we should do it voluntarily. We should deploy code of conducts, ethics, and so on, which research does, right? But if they don't work, I would not rule out regulation as a means to an end.
So maybe to continue with this topic of regulations and technology, there was another controversial topic that popped up in the last year, which was there were proposals to scan for child sexual abuse material in Europe and in other countries around the world that in some sense meant that encryption, confidential communication would be weakened in some way in order to enable this functionality, which clearly we need in order to mitigate that kind of abuse. So do you believe that this is even technically possible, that we could preserve end-to-end confidentiality of our communication, privacy, and at the same time perform this kind of scanning for let's say, illegal material that is being distributed? Any views on that?
Shall I start?
Kenny is our end-to-end communication expert.
I'm sure all the panelists will have interesting views on this. The first question is it technically possible? It's clearly possible to build a system because Apple did it. But then subsequently, a lot of independent security analysis was done of that system and significant flaws were found in it. And Apple, I presumably put a lot of engineering effort into this, put some of their best people on it. And indeed, some eminent people in the security community were involved in helping to develop it and audit it. But it still fell apart pretty quickly once it was exposed to the broader research community. So it's actually, in some sense, still unclear whether, I think theoretically it's certainly possible, but then the question you have to translate it into is, first of all, do we know how to engineer such systems securely and manage them in a way that they cannot be abused? And then thirdly come the social questions about whether it's desirable to do that. So you haven't asked the social question yet. Let me address the engineering question first of all. It's clear from decades of experience that we don't know how to build systems with this level of complexity in them whose security we can maintain over the time periods required. That's how I see it currently.
Any other views, Mona? Can we use confidential computing to do this?
So I was going to say my first reaction was it feels like fundamentally impossible, but then there are technologies like I guess MPC, and maybe actually you brought up this is what I was thinking, MPC combined with confidential computing to be able to actually solve this. But yeah, so I don't think we can give up. I think we have enough technologies, and maybe as new technologies are coming on board, we can address it. But yes, that's all. Yeah.
I want to raise another issue, and this is what's the motivation? I'm always suspicious when I hear proposals to weaken cryptography in order to do some social good, to help humanity, etc. There were many previous attempts to weaken cryptography, and in most cases they were motivated by security agencies, by governments, in order to be able to penetrate into systems in an easier way. I'm in general principle against the idea of let's pick up something that we all agree on, that children should be protected, and use it as an excuse in order to put backdoors into crypto systems. It leads to a kind of slippery slope. Today it is protecting children. Next time it will be protecting some other good cause, and very quickly we lose security altogether.
So I think that's a great point. That's the problem, right? You can relax it for one use case, and there's no guarantee it won't be used. But that's exactly what we have to figure out a way to not weaken the crypto, but we still be able to do this somehow, right?
No, but suppose that you have a system which only allows you to succeed in this goal. I believe that government organizations are going to see this as a success and then push for broader kind of backdoors. And it will be on the political side, trying to get the regulations in order to have weaker and weaker kind of cryptography, rather than the particular scheme being misused for other purposes.
Florian?
Okay. There I'm actually 100% on your page. So I also think between the technical capabilities, so even if we could do it, and even if we could do it at a reasonable cost, we also need to understand a lot of companies out there are economic players, they have a certain margin and they don't want to invest too much into computational costs and so on. So if we could do it, the question would still be, as you said, where is the boundary? So when you know that I have illegal content on my phone, you know something about me. It's actually a word I learned in one of David's classes, the reasonable expectation of privacy, right? I think we can agree that child pornography is not acceptable, but where's the boundary? What is acceptable, what isn't? A little bit illegal, is that acceptable? It should be. All of us did something stupid. Some smoked a joint when they were young and no one caught them and it was fine, right? It was illegal. And I think we come in very hot water with these kind of questions. And we should also understand that we still have a lot of technical means to actually do targeted surveys and actually find out things about people where we have a reasonable amount of evidence. And especially in democracies, we're not yet fully using those capabilities where actually a court of law needs to make decisions. So I think it's a very loaded, very difficult discussion, but I definitely see regulators and lawmakers pushing in that direction because the European Union had the discussion and we had the discussion as well.
Okay. So moving on to another topic that raised a lot of interest in Switzerland, and that was the one of e-voting. Right? Switzerland opted to deploy an e-voting system that is rather complex, based on a number of let's say crypto primitives that are not commonly deployed in today's commercial systems, riddled with zero-knowledge proofs and similar techniques that we could say are only hitting the mainstream in the context of blockchains, but not really government and societal and let's say systems that are important for society. So the question to the panel is somehow technical as well, but also in some sense the question of the societies and how much they can accept this. do we have technologies that are mature enough and that the society might accept that could essentially deploy such critical systems as e-voting, on which we are, let's say, societies in some way rely? So should we digitalize everything, right, including such critical systems? Do we have enough confidence in the technology?
I think it's going to happen no matter what, and technologies are getting there. And again, actually, I guess I talked about confidential computing. It also has its own problems like hardware replay attacks, side channels, and like I was saying earlier again, so I think combining different technologies are there, and some of these systems will get there, but is it 5 years, 10 years? Like I was talking about the healthcare systems, the e-prescription example, but you're right, it's the public perception that may take even longer. So one is we need to get the technologies, and then the convincing the public.
Florian?
I'm not going to speak on the technology, you all are much more deep in there, but I see there's a balance sheet, right? So one is if voting is easier accessible, more people will vote, so democracy benefits. So that speaks for it, right? Then the question is, how many votes can be forged efficiently? Even if you use the postal system to vote, there's a number of votes that are forged or invalid or, but it's beyond a certain boundary. And I do think especially in the e-voting discussion, we quite often talk about there's one problem and that invalidates the whole system, rather than speaking about boundaries and acceptable boundaries, because security isn't absolute. There's a residual risk, and I would like to push the discussion in that direction. And I do think technological risk is one, but there's an upside as well.
So I tend to agree with everyone. I believe that it's maybe unavoidable. We are moving towards online activities, but early experiments are not promising. I'm talking about, the vote by mail in the US, which is a joke, can be manipulated in multiple ways. I'm thinking about some early secure voting systems which had been implemented in the US, but there were all kinds of problems with them. But the biggest issue is really that electronic voting is one of the hardest security problems, because the biggest problem is not to decide who is the winner in the election, but to convince everyone, including the losers, that they are the losers. And as long as they will say that, look, this is a kind of system which could be penetrated by hackers. We don't know exactly how it can be done, but it can be manipulated by the government. It's enough in order to sow some discord and disagreement. And in order to, even in today's system, there is some cheating going on, but the cheating is low level. A particular voting station might have a dishonest chairman, and he will stuff a few extra envelopes into the box. But this is not going to have a big effect. But if there is going to be a system where, there is a possibility of somebody manipulating it, and you don't have to point out exactly how it was done, but if it's enough, if enough people are going to believe that the results are not fair, the results do not make sense, everyone was sure that candidate A was supposed to win, suddenly candidate B was supposed to win. Something went wrong. And with an electronic voting system, it's much harder in order to convince everyone that it was fair and level system.
Kenny?
So I broadly agree with what the other panelists have said. I'd bring in one other aspect, which is that it's taken us hundreds, maybe even thousands of years to achieve what we've achieved in terms of democracy in the world today. There are still hundreds of countries, or dozens, or maybe even 100 countries where there is really no form of democracy. We have it here in Switzerland and broadly in Europe. It's something that's very, very delicate, and we see what's happening in the United States now. Maybe this year's presidential election is the last presidential election in the United States of America. And some of you are laughing, some of you are like, yeah. So it's a very delicate instrument, and so if we want to modify how we use that instrument or how we allow people to use that instrument, I think we have to be extraordinarily careful with that. Now here in Switzerland, there's been a lot of progress made, so maybe most people in the room know about Post's efforts to build electronic voting systems that can be used in various types of election here in Switzerland. There's been a lot of auditing done. The core protocols seem quite sound. Formal security analyses of those protocols have been commissioned. So we're at a technological level, we're building up confidence that these systems might do a good job. What we're fundamentally missing is user acceptance. The fact that human beings, your grandmother, whoever, will be comfortable using this kind of system and be convinced that the result is, so it's transparency, but not technological transparency as we define it as a technical security requirement in an e-voting protocol. It's a human kind of transparency. And I think that pretty much
Florian,
is what Adi was saying.
You mentioned you wanted to say something.
And I think that's a very important point, but it also goes with me. I think also with the electronic system, you can put out certain proofs. Now, you need very smart people who can do that. So I'd rather invest in generating trust for these smart people that they say the right thing, because I can also challenge, and it happens everywhere across the world, traditional elections, right? And I think that's why it's important to also have education, also technical education. And I think with the increasing digitalization of different services, we need to readjust what we learn also in, very basic school or kindergarten about technology. I don't need to be an expert, but I need to sort of know how trustworthy is it? How trustworthy is something someone says? And by the way, making a bit the loop back to AI, right? I mean, AI is a great assistant if you don't believe everything AI texts you, right? I use it to write letters because it's the first half an hour it saves me, right? And then I have to make things right. If I know these boundaries, it's very, very useful. And I think the more AI and fake images and everything will be out there, the more it forces us to actually reuse our brain and engage with these topics. And I'm more on the positive aspect of saying, trust and actually verification of expert voices will come back or strengthen again. But there are others that go in a different direction.
I feel much more negative about that. So let me give you an analogy. Growing up on the plains of Africa 200,000 years ago, humans were able to, just about outrun a lion. Actually, in reality, not, right? But we had legs, we could stand up. Things moved at certain speeds and in certain directions. Then, high energy physics came along, and we're dealing with things on the Planck scale with gigantic energies, and human intuition lets you down. I feel like we're entering into that kind of territory with things like, AI-generated deepfakes and so on and so on. It's potentially the case that they're just going to outrun the potential of the human brain to process, to understand, to sort the good from the bad. So I'm much more negative than you, Florian, on the outlook there.
I see that direction, absolutely. I just tend to go in the other one.
So let me maybe shine then a light of hope, at least when it comes to the topic of e-voting. So if we would make it verifiable by each human, we would then do a blockchain, right? So what do our panelists see as potential uses of this technology, which has gone through a huge cycle of investment and hype, like any technology does? What do we have now? How useful is that? Do you see any uses of it? Or if the entire panel is silent, then I guess that's also an answer. But I mean, please go ahead.
I'll say something quickly. No, so blockchain is a way to establish trust. We've seen success in cryptocurrencies, right? And there are a few other use cases. But it's also really expensive if you don't have multiple parties involved. And actually, I may sound like a broken record, but this is the And they are solving that problem in blockchains by using a confidential compute environment. You can use confidential compute for confidentiality of the transactions or like verifiability of the computations again. And you can do very, very cheap blockchains. And so the possible usages that are being talked about, at least there's lots of money in this space now, is Web3, and confidential computing and blockchain is sort of seems like it could make this a reality. But yeah, that's
a great perspective.
Say, yes, yeah.
So I want to mention something about the history of blockchain. Of course, there is the side of digital currencies, which I'm going, like Bitcoin. I'm not going to talk about them. I'm going to talk about applications of the general notion of kind of distributed agreement, which is described by the protocol. So it seems to have some merit, but unfortunately, there are big problems in most of the concrete applications which had been either proposed or tested. For example, people have suggested, let's move the land registry to the blockchain, and then we'll have a very secure result. But the whole idea is to have a distributed system, whereas land registry is highly centralized because the government is saying that this parcel of land belongs to that person. So it's not a situation where different people have to decide who owns this piece of land. It's a government service which is highly centralized. So I don't see the big benefit in moving the land registry to the blockchain. There are cases where it makes more sense. For example, the shipping business. When you ship a kind of container from China to Europe, there are the issues of the shipping company and the port where this container is going to be stored. There are many, many people involved, and they all have to contribute and agree on the state of the container and the payments paid for the container, etc. So it looked promising, and IBM indeed started a very high-profile project several years ago together with Maersk, one of the biggest shipping companies. So they built a very complicated system based on blockchain technology, and they touted it as here is a big achievement. And a few years ago, very quietly, they declared that they are abandoning this project because it really didn't lead to any savings or any improvements. It was a big futile effort which led nowhere. So you have to be careful. There could be applications where it makes sense, but we have many failed attempts so far to put things on the blockchain.
Kenny?
So I would summarize what Adi just said as saying that databases still have a lot to offer. But I want to say something else on top of that, which is that for cryptography, for research in cryptography, blockchains and then Web3 and everything that followed from it has actually been really great because it's brought new people into the field. It's brought new problems to solve, new ideas, new techniques, repurposing of old techniques. It's given us a much richer playground in which to play. It has also had the effect of taking lots of really strong cryptographers out of the academic community into these Web3 companies. But I think that they will all come back again at some point.
ETH is hiring. So maybe bringing us back to point-to-point communication, and one but last topic, I promise, there is food and drinks. Quantum key distribution. So this is a technology that seems to be deployed in some countries as essentially almost like a replacement of key establishment techniques that are based on some hardness assumption. So what are your views on the necessity and utility of such systems? Any takers?
So I studied it a little bit. There are problems with almost all aspects. First of all, the deployed systems were described as totally secure, unbreakable by the fundamental laws of physics, and so on and so on. And then there was a group which called itself the Quantum Hacking Group in Norway, and they actually broke the security of deployed systems, one of which was made by a Swiss company. So in spite of the promised total security of the system, there were side channels that allowed you to shine light, strong pulse of light into the system, and this confused the detector, and all kinds of things which the original designers of the implementation didn't think about. The real world is much more complicated. There are ways to influence the sender and the receiver. So the technology was not perfect, far from perfect. On top of it, there is the question of, is it really helpful? So at least in the original systems, it enabled you to send a key securely a distance of a few tens of kilometers. It was difficult to send it a longer period because you needed a very high quality fiber optic line in order not to lose the coherence or lose the photons whose polarization was used as the quantum information. And in order to send, a key a few 20 kilometers away from Zurich, I don't think that I need a very complicated system. It can be sent by courier in a kind of physically tamper-evident way, such distances. The real difficulty is to have a system that will enable a military headquarters to communicate securely halfway around the world to thousands or millions of possible locations. And if you need the specialized fiber optic lines in order to achieve it, it's just too expensive and it will not work out. So there are problems at the technical side, there are problems at the utility side, and overall I'm pessimistic.
Okay.
Yeah, there's not much to add to what Adi said. But let me just say that 20 years ago, now I'm really showing my age, in 2004, I published a paper called Why Quantum Cryptography? And I'm really still waiting for an answer.
So that was the paper.
Yeah.
Okay.
And every so often, the physicists write some kind of rebuttal in which they show that they don't really understand cryptography. So what I would say, I don't want to be too brutal towards some of my best friends are physicists. It's very, very nice physics. It's potentially interesting cryptographically, but that doesn't make it useful cryptographically. And I think that's really maybe a little bit what you were saying before. It's a very interesting situation today. If you buy a commercial QKD system, they are available for purchase if you have the right nationality and you're in the right country and export control doesn't get in the way. And you will achieve something like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 kilobits per second of secure key over a range of maybe 20 kilometers. And that isn't really enough high-speed key material to use it in, say, a one-time pad to get perfect security, which is how it was originally advertised, unbreakable security according to the laws of quantum physics. So what you end up doing in today's commercial systems is taking that key material and using it in a hybrid system. So you take the key material and you cut it up into chunks, and each chunk is used as an AES key or a key in AES GCM if you want the exact algorithm. And now you have to ask yourself the question, well, what have I really gained from that? And it turns out that if you do a formal security analysis of such a hybrid system alongside a system which just takes a single short symmetric key and derives fresh keys from that in a forward secure manner, the security bounds tell you that there's actually very little difference between the hybrid QKD system and the fully classical system. The difference is the fully classical system runs in software and costs you nothing. Okay, so that's my take on it.
So maybe last question for all the panelists. I'm sorry, Florian.
Just one little sentence. I read a couple of papers while coming here, and I asked out with the question, what does it help me? But actually, I do think it's one of the problems where it's solving the problem of we need to do research to understand things. So I still think it's useful to look into these kind of things, and that's where I see the real value today.
Can I tell a quick story? I used to work in the UK, and I joined there a quantum communications hub, which was this very large inter-university research program. They were told, you have to have a classical cryptographer on board or we won't fund you. So I got the call. So I joined. And this was worth something like 20 million over 5 years, which is, in Swiss terms, is not a huge amount of money, but in the UK, that's a lot of money. And about a month later, in the mail, in the physical mail, I was sent a gigantic optical components catalog, 400 pages long, full color. Okay? That tells you something about how the money is spent in these large research projects. And it's sort of what you were saying, Florian. It's a mechanism to allow physicists to equip their labs. Yeah. Now, if you gave me and my community of applied cryptographers 20 million and said, can you design us a secure communication system? I think we could do it and give back maybe 19 million.
I'll hold you true to that.
Okay, so that's obviously just short-term thinking on my part. I'm not thinking big scale enough, right? But the point is, I think it goes to the core of the matter. QKD doesn't solve a problem that we can already solve essentially for free. And so, that doesn't mean we should stop investigating it, but we have to think about where we put our limited research resources.
Absolutely. We need to prioritize. I agree.
Yeah.
So maybe I mention one more thing. There's one country in the world which believes in quantum key distribution, and this is China. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars launching a satellite into space whose sole purpose is to send cryptographic keys securely between Beijing and Shanghai and other places in China. And no other country got alarmed or decided to set up a similar endeavor. And this shows the official thinking of most countries in the world. And in China, I think that it's a waste of money.
China also built a QKD network between Beijing and Shanghai, so over a range of hundreds of kilometers. Of course, you can't do that with an end-to-end secure system. So there are various points along the chain where the data can be read in plain text. And so, again, there's this range issue that comes in practice. I think, though, the Chinese example is interesting because it does play into the kind of geopolitics of technology. And in particular, I've seen arguments made by European scientists that we are falling behind the Chinese, and so we need to put more investment into quantum and QKD technology.
Are they physicists?
Sorry?
Are they physicists?
I wouldn't like to identify them at that level of detail, but
That's one example where
I've seen those
politicians
discussions.
are not lured by this kind of argument.
Okay.
Usually, you say China, and everyone stands up and pays.
So maybe piggybacking on your earlier discussion about how optimistic or pessimistic you are about our future in general, or let's say better say security and privacy of the technologies that we are deploying. Will things get better or worse? Where do you stand there? Do the technologies that we have and that we are developing, do they offer significant enough promise for you to believe that the future is bright, or do you believe that it's not?
We were never, in the history of humankind, so secure and yet so insecure. We have huge research effort, thousands of papers, researchers, ideas, products. Companies are spending huge amounts of money on buying all those security products in order to protect their systems. So we should be in good shape. In reality, attacks are continuing in spite of all this effort. So I think that it's a kind of stalemate or sliding backwards at some rate. I don't think that with the huge improvement in the number and quality and types of protective devices that you can buy today, you should feel a lot safer.
Florian?
I think I already said I'm on the positive side. So I actually think digitalization brings a lot of good things. And yes, there are downsides, and honestly, I think the world is heading in a worse direction, short term at least, but that's not technology's fault, that's people's fault mostly. But I also do think technology brings a lot of solutions to interesting problems, right? And when we look across history, humanity has always been in a place where something was new, industrialization was new. What worries me a bit today is that we're not having a more academic discussion also on the economic side, for example. I don't see recent economic theories, how technology will change our economic ecosystem. I don't see compelling political theories. That worries me a bit, and I think we should really get that together and take technology into account. But overall, I do think while life will short-term get a bit more difficult, technology will help get us through it.
Any last remarks from yeah?
No, I'll say I agree. I think the reason we are sliding backwards while technologies have advanced so much is because we are just producing so much more data. And I still think the one big problem is we are still, people, I'm not sure how much they really care about privacy, because they are this whole advent of social media, and otherwise you're relying on the institutional trust. You're assuming CSPs are keeping your data safe. And so yes, so technologies like confidential computing you can move to this programmatic trust, and hopefully there's a better hope, but right now the current state, I agree, we are somewhat sliding backwards.
Kenny?
I'm also broadly pessimistic. But I want to end on an optimistic note. I'm broadly pessimistic because I think it's almost trite to say it, but information security or cybersecurity, it's a fundamentally asymmetric problem, right? The defender has to get lucky all of the time, and the attacker only has to get lucky once, roughly speaking. I think also, building on what you were saying, over the last 10 or 20 years, we walked with our eyes closed into this era of surveillance capitalism. Our information being harvested, collected, analyzed and exploited and used to sell us things. They used to say, if the product is free, then you are the product. And I think, though, to end on an optimistic note, I think gradually, at least in this room and maybe in wider society, people are waking up, they're opening their eyes, and they're seeing what's happened. And there's still a chance to actually reclaim, if you like, data sovereignty for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of great work happening in academia right now. There's a lot of good work happening in civil society as well. All we have to do is persuade big tech to give us back our data.
And big tech to help us.
Indeed.
So as a moderator, I'm not going to give my view on any of these topics, but I will draw one conclusion from this discussion that I think it holds, which is that if you continue supporting ZISC, things will get better. So keep doing that. There is hope. Yeah. With this, I would really like to thank our panelists and thank all of you for being here. There is an apéro outside. Thank you so much. We'll continue the chat outside and in the Docenten foyer. So thank you so much.